Imagine an evening in Monte Carlo with warm Mediterranean air, drifting through the marble corridors of a palace perched above the glittering sea. A poised, elegant woman glides across an opulent salon. Her perfectly fitted gown whispers against the polished floor, and for a heartbeat, the onlooker might recognize the same figure who once lit up Hollywood's silver screen, a cinematic icon turned real-life princess. Yet behind the grandeur and the illusions, this princess, Grace Kelly, carried a deep reservoir of longing. She was a woman shaped by rebellious teenage impulses and stifled ambitions, who found her greatest role on a real-life stage only to discover that the palace gates could sometimes resemble the bars of a gilded cage. Grace Patricia Kelly was born on November 12, 1929, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, into a family as competitive as they were prosperous. Her father, John B. Kelly, famously known as Jack, was a three-time Olympic gold medalist in rowing who had parlayed his reputation into a construction empire. Her mother, Margaret Major Kelly, was athletic, graceful, and a former coach of the women's athletic teams at the University of Pennsylvania. To outsiders, they seemed a golden couple forging an American dynasty, a household that expected big wins in sports and even bigger triumphs in life. Their children, Peggy, John Jr., Elizabeth, and Grace, were all encouraged from the cradle to be the best at everything they touched. And then there was Grace, her parents' third child and second daughter, who didn't easily fit the mold. Growing up, she was plagued by sinus problems, colds, and frequent infections. Relatives saw her as sickly and shy, particularly next to her older siblings, who excelled at swimming, rowing, or other physically demanding endeavors. Her father and mother were quick to reward sporting victories, but they had little patience for what they perceived as Grace's fragility. Her father especially exuded a brusque pride in physical accomplishments, and though he loved her, his expectations clashed with her gentler nature. In that lively household, she felt overshadowed, a quiet, slender girl who drew little attention. She performed adequately in academics, but never truly distinguished herself in any subject. Teachers liked her good manners, and classmates found her agreeable, if a bit reserved. She wore thick glasses in class, which further dulled her image. It was only as she inched toward adolescence that she began to feel a restlessness in her heart. She wasn't going to be a track star like her father might have wished, nor did she want to perfect a tennis swing or golf drive. Instead, she felt a magnetic pull toward performance, reciting poetry, delivering lines in small school plays, or intently reading scripts to imagine how she might interpret the roles. She marveled at the transformative power of acting, the way someone could slip beneath the skin of a character and convey human truths that no amount of sporting success could match. Naturally, this inclination horrified her father. One day, Grace declared she wished to pursue a career in acting, a statement so out of alignment with the Kelly family brand that her father blurted out a reaction he'd later regret. Acting is a slim cut above street walking. To him, the stage and screen seemed sordid, a world filled with rumors, moral compromises, and unpredictability. Jack Kelly prided himself on discipline and honest hard work. The concept of show business might as well have come from another planet. But Grace's will was hardened by years of feeling lesser. If she couldn't be the champion athlete her parents desired, perhaps she could find her own place in the spotlight. Upon graduating from high school, she was determined to spread her wings. Though still slender and seemingly delicate, she possessed a quiet fortitude that her parents failed to see. She convinced them with difficulty to let her move to New York City to attend the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, a highly regarded institution for budding actors. They grudgingly agreed, hoping it was a phase she might outgrow, or at least keep under control. Once in Manhattan, Grace found a new playground for her evolving sense of self. She moved into the Barbizon Hotel for Women, an establishment known for strict curfews and vigilant house matrons. Her father insisted on the arrangement, believing it would keep her out of trouble in that hectic metropolis. Grace, however, was not so easily subdued. The Barbizon might have had rules about men not being allowed upstairs or about mandatory lights-out times, but she and her friends found ways around these barriers. They'd creep in after midnight, hush each other in the elevator, and occasionally, though it was rumored more than confirmed, Grace could be seen dancing freely, even topless, in the corridors when she felt especially bold. Far from the shy girl in Philadelphia, she was experimenting with a more audacious side, indulging in small rebellions that fed her appetite for drama and self-expression. At the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, she immersed herself in vocal exercises and the mastery of posture. Her teachers recognized in her a disciplined, detail-oriented student who possessed a surprisingly warm presence on stage. These were the years in which she polished her trademark calm, that poised aura that made audiences hang on her every word. Nevertheless, she wasn't simply an industrious student. She also dived into a brief romance with one of her acting coaches, Don Richardson, a relationship that caused no small stir. Some people gossiped that she was far too forward, while her parents, outraged by the rumors, demanded she break it off. They found Don's background suspect, and they wanted Grace to focus on respectable suitors, not older men from the theater scene. Reluctantly, she ended the relationship. Yet each time her parents interfered, Grace grew more certain that she would carve her own path, even if it meant going behind their backs. Her chance to break into the industry arrived in a whirlwind. Talent scouts and Hollywood insiders prowled theaters and drama showcases in New York, ever watchful for promising newcomers. Grace, performing in a small stage production, was spotted by producers who saw in her a mixture of delicacy and steel, an irresistible paradox that might translate well on film. Before long, she auditioned for a role in High Noon, 1952, a Western starring the charismatic Gary Cooper. She was only 22, barely out of acting school, yet Hollywood beckoned with open arms. This was the type of leap that devoured many naive hopefuls. Grace, however, was more prepared than people realized. She accepted the part, left the stage behind, and arrived on set to find herself in a new, uncertain world of big-budget filmmaking. It didn't take long for Gary Cooper, significantly older and undeniably magnetic, to notice the fresh-faced actress. In the dusty heat of a Western set, the lines between real life and fiction can blur. Their chemistry on screen fed a behind-the-scenes flirtation that quickly, as rumor had it, became an affair. Cooper was married, and Grace was completely taken in by his reputation and easy charm. For her, it was an awakening, a swirl of passion, heartbreak, and moral conflict. When production wrapped, Cooper returned to his wife, leaving Grace wounded and wiser about the casual cruelties that can lurk in Tinseltown. That heartbreak stung all the more because she'd believed in her idealistic way that their connection meant more than a fleeting fling. In a business that never pauses, Grace soon landed her next role, Mogambo, 1953, directed by the legendary John Ford and shot on location in Africa. She replaced Gene Tierney, who dropped out last minute, seizing what felt like a golden opportunity. Her co-star this time was Clark Gable, another older, married leading man with a larger-than-life presence. And though Grace had just learned a harsh lesson from Gary Cooper's retreat, she found herself drawn yet again to forbidden territory. She and Gable embarked on a short-lived romance amid the safari tents, the roars of distant lions, and the humidity of the African wilderness. Once filming ended, Gable left for his life back in Hollywood, and she returned to hers, now carrying 2 consecutive heartbreaks from older married men. But she told nobody of her private sorrow. She pressed on, stoic and determined. Fortune or fate next brought Grace into the orbit of director Alfred Hitchcock. He was known for finding actresses who radiated a cool, composed beauty, women in whom, as he once said of Grace, he suspected a volcano covered with snow. He cast her in Dial M for Murder, 1954, sensing that her clear diction, refined demeanor, and subtle emotional undertones could be shaped into something extraordinary. She worked alongside Ray Milland, who was also married. Tabloids soon buzzed about yet another rumored affair, and Grace earned a creeping reputation as a homewrecker. The press's appetite for scandal overshadowed her developing craft, and it stung her to see headlines painting her as a seductress instead of a serious performer. Privately, she wrestled with guilt and confusion. Why did she keep falling for these unattainable men, and why did these men feel compelled to pursue her? Later that same year, Hitchcock cast her again in Rear Window, 1954, opposite James Stewart. Anyone who's watched that film can confirm that Grace Kelly is a revelation. Luminous, self-possessed, delivering a performance that turned what could have been a simple love interest into a vibrant, unforgettable character. Off-camera, James Stewart was known to be happily married, and though Grace still possessed that intangible draw, Stewart remained strictly professional. In fact, his wife Gloria was said to keep a close eye on the set, determined to protect her marriage from the rumored powers of Grace Kelly's allure. If Grace ever harbored an interest in Stewart, it never bloomed. He became one of the few high-profile leading men she did not manage to entangle. At the same time, her collaborations with Hitchcock continued to elevate her star status. He once called her an ice sculpture with a furnace inside, and Hollywood seemed fascinated by that very contrast. By the end of 1954, Grace was eager to prove that she was more than a polished ingenue or the object of swirling tabloid rumors. She took on a challenging role in The Country Girl, 1954, playing the neglected wife of an alcoholic has-been singer. The film co-starred Bing Crosby and William Holden, 2 more married men, incidentally, with rumored personal interest in Grace. The press watched closely, calling her social life complicated or scandalous. Yet from a purely cinematic perspective, Grace's performance was mesmerizing. She cast aside the polished veneer to portray a woman burdened by disappointment and sacrifice, and critics took note. In a major upset at the 1955 Academy Awards, Grace Kelly won Best Actress for The Country Girl, beating out Judy Garland, who'd been considered the favorite for her dramatic role in A Star is Born. The crowd gasped. The people of Philadelphia, who once thought her quiet and unremarkable, now boasted of her as the city's golden girl. Even her father, once so scornful of acting, began to revise his opinion, though Grace never forgot that humiliating slight about streetwalkers. No sooner had she tasted Oscar glory than rumors flared about her personal life in the aftermath of that triumphant night. Whispers flew that Bing Crosby had tried to visit her hotel suite only to find Marlon Brando already there. The story was never confirmed, but it fueled the tabloids, painting Grace as a siren with an insatiable appetite for star power. Were these rumors entirely fair or accurate? Probably not, but they fed the narrative of Grace Kelly as the glamorous actress with a scandalous off-screen life, an irony given her trademark sophistication on camera. Amid these swirling romantic entanglements, Grace attempted a more stable route by accepting an engagement to the fashion designer Oleg Cassini. He was charming, dashing, and stylish. However, her parents objected vehemently to the match, complaining about his divorces, his foreignness, and his perceived inability to provide Grace with a respectable, clean image. With mounting pressure, Grace eventually broke off the engagement, though rumors hinted that she had become pregnant by Cassini and terminated the pregnancy, a story never substantiated but widely whispered. Heartbroken once again, she poured her energy into the next big Hollywood event, the 1955 Cannes Film Festival. And at that festival, her life changed forever. A magazine editor orchestrated a publicity photo shoot featuring Grace with Prince Rainier, the third of Monaco, who was then one of Europe's most eligible royals. She traveled by train to Monaco for what she assumed would be a quick, polite photo opportunity in the lush palace gardens. She was charmed by the dapper, intelligent man who showed her around the grounds, and Rainier, who had observed many socialites pass through Monaco's glittering circles, found Grace's unassuming elegance refreshing. They parted ways, but soon they began exchanging letters. In an era before texting and email, that kind of epistolary romance carried an air of deep intimacy. By Christmas of 1955, Prince Rainier arrived in Philadelphia to meet Grace's formidable family. In a swift, dramatic turn of events, he proposed, and she accepted. The Kelly parents, who had looked down on men like Don Richardson and Oleg Cassini, now welcomed the prince with open arms. Here was the suitable match they'd always wanted for their daughter, a European monarch, Catholic and sophisticated, who would elevate Grace from Hollywood starlet to real-life royalty. The engagement thrust Grace into a global spotlight. From that moment forward, paparazzi hounded her every move. Part of the bargain, though, was that Grace had to abandon her acting career. Rainier wanted a wife whose image was beyond reproach, a princess who would devote herself to the principality and family. To ensure she was truly done with Hollywood, the studios required her to fulfill her existing contracts, so she squeezed in one last film, High Society, 1956. During filming, she wore her stunning engagement ring in public, an enormous bauble that sent tabloids into overdrive. Fans were torn between celebrating her fairytale romance and lamenting the loss of one of the most promising actresses of her generation. The wedding itself was a spectacle, spread across 2 ceremonies in April 1956. The civil ceremony took place in the throne room of the palace, and the following day they held a lavish religious ceremony at Monaco's St. Nicholas Cathedral. A huge wave of press descended on the tiny principality. The bride wore a now iconic gown of silken lace designed by Helen Rose. The entire event looked like something from a Disney movie, but behind the scenes, Rainier and Grace felt suffocated by the swarms of photographers, the persistent camera flashes, and the noise of crowds pressing in. The newlyweds later admitted that the chaos overshadowed what should have been the most personal, meaningful moment of their lives. With the pomp and ceremony behind her, the new Princess of Monaco settled into palace life. At first it was exhilarating, fancy receptions, official visits, and the satisfaction of a grand new role. But before long, Grace began to realize that her existence had narrowed to the strict protocols of monarchy. She was expected to be a model princess, always poised, always smiling, presiding over charitable events and exemplifying Catholic virtue. The rebellious young woman who once broke curfew at the Barbizon Hotel to go dancing was gone. Even the actress who commanded the set with quiet brilliance had vanished. All that remained was a princess, and Grace soon found that monarchy could be stifling, especially when her husband showed little interest in sharing the deeper aspects of her artistic side. Nevertheless, she performed her royal duties diligently. She gave birth to Princess Caroline in 1957 and Prince Albert in 1958, fulfilling a key expectation, producing heirs. There were also devastating miscarriages along the way, untold heartbreaks she endured largely in private. Rainier was preoccupied with governing Monaco, building its economy and nurturing its image as a glamorous playground for the wealthy. Grace tried to fit in, hosting philanthropic events, focusing on her family, and trying to inject creativity into the otherwise rigid environment. Yet the murmurings of dissatisfaction grew louder inside her mind. She missed the craft of acting and the sense of identity it had given her. In 1962, Alfred Hitchcock approached her with what could have been a triumphant comeback, the lead in his psychological drama, Marnie. Reports say Grace jumped at the idea. She devoured the script, excited to collaborate once more with the director who had shaped her career and adored her talents. But Monaco's palace advisors balked at the notion of their princess portraying a disturbed, troubled thief, a far cry from the demure figure they wanted her to be. Ultimately, the project was shut down. Some say Rainier himself disapproved, though whether out of jealousy or a sense of duty, no one can be entirely sure. The rejection was a crushing blow for Grace, effectively sealing the coffin on her acting ambitions. As the years passed, Grace grew lonely. Royal protocol insisted she present a serene, untroubled face, so she rarely let her sadness show in public. She focused on philanthropic endeavors, establishing arts festivals and children's charities, but these pursuits could not replicate the thrill she once felt on a film set. She confided in close friends, possibly even in the occasional letter to Cary Grant, who had always been one of her staunchest admirers. Yet everything was censored by palace staff. Her life was, in many ways, no longer her own. She wasn't entirely without bright moments. She had a chance meeting with the young Lady Diana Spencer in 1981, shortly after Diana became engaged to Prince Charles. Sensing Diana's nerves at a formal event, Grace took her aside, reassuring her with humor. Their conversation ended with a line that gained legendary status. "Don't worry, dear. It'll only get worse." Half joking, half grim, it revealed Grace's awareness of how oppressive royalty could be, ironic foreshadowing, given that both women would die tragically and far too young. And then came that fateful day in September 1982. By then, Grace rarely drove herself, preferring chauffeurs or formal escorts for palace errands. But on September 13th, for reasons never fully explained, she decided to take the wheel to drive her teenage daughter, Princess Stephanie, along one of Monaco's winding roads. Witness accounts suggest Grace seemed unwell or distressed just before losing control. Medical experts surmise that she suffered a mild stroke, causing her to veer off a steep embankment. The car plummeted around 50 feet, landing in a crumpled wreck. Stephanie survived with only minor injuries, but Grace was unconscious and severely injured. The monarchy's medical teams rushed her to the hospital, where scans revealed grim news. A brain hemorrhage had triggered the stroke that caused the accident, and a second hemorrhage had been unleashed by the trauma of the crash itself. She slipped into a coma, her condition declared irreversible by the medical specialists. On September 14, 1982, Prince Rainier agreed to remove her from life support, effectively ending the life of a woman whose name had become synonymous with poise and royalty. She was only 52. News of Grace Kelly's death sent shockwaves worldwide. Leaders, celebrities, and millions of fans mourned a star who had bridged the gap between Hollywood and European nobility. At her funeral in Monaco, figures from both of her worlds assembled to pay respects. Cary Grant, Princess Diana, and other dignitaries joined grieving citizens who had come to love their Princess Grace. Stephanie, still grappling with her own physical and emotional trauma, did not attend the funeral, a decision that fueled speculation about the severity of her injuries and her deep psychological scars. People also whispered about the accident itself. Was Stephanie behind the wheel, as some conspiracy theories suggested? Did Grace's ill health play a larger role than the official statements indicated? In the end, the monarchy gave only guarded explanations, leaving rumors to fester. Prince Rainier, though rumored to have been distant in the later years of their marriage, was devastated. He never remarried, dedicating the remainder of his life to their children and to preserving Grace's memory. When he died in 2005, he was buried next to her in Monaco's Grimaldi family vault, as if, after all the misunderstandings and emotional distances, they still shared an eternal bond. Grace Kelly's life was as dazzling as it was heartbreaking. She captivated the silver screen, enchanted a prince, and redefined royalty with elegance and poise. But her story was far from a fairy tale. Beneath the diamonds and designer gowns was a woman who sacrificed her voice, her art, and ultimately her freedom for a life behind palace gates. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more behind-the-scenes Hollywood history.